In late October, the U.S. announced new sanctions against Russia's main oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil, with restrictions set to take effect on November 21. India, one of Moscow's biggest buyers, is now reviewing its oil contracts but hasn't fully stepped away from Russian crude. Meanwhile, OPEC Plus has paused its production growth under pressure from Russia, and the Kremlin insists its economy remains stable. Several forecasts also point a potential oil glut in 2026, a rare window that could magnify the effect of these measures. How deep is the real hit to Russia's energy sector, and what could follow next? We'll discuss it with Dr. Thomas O'Donnell, an American energy and geopolitics strategist based in Berlin. Mr. O'Donnell, it's a pleasure to have you here online in our studio.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk to people in Ukraine.
So let's start with the most recent shift. India seems to be reviewing its contracts for Russian oil after new U.S. sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, yet imports reportedly even rose in October. How do you read this? Is India truly backing away from Russian oil or just adjusting the optics?
Well, as I think I told you last time about the drone campaign, it was a little bit early to tell. Yes. These things take a while to play out. The American side has insisted, not just Trump, but also a number of people in the cabinet have said that they will be quite stern about this. They will really enforce these sanctions. And it's not just against India. Mr. Orban is going to Washington to beg for an exemption. And the U.S. NATO ambassador said, you know, we're going to enforce these. You got a pipeline coming from the Adriatic. You can use that instead. Another cabinet member said, hey, we'll build a pipeline to Hungary and give you non-Russian oil. So if that's the attitude they're taking towards people who, you know, they're some in the administration are ideologically close to, the way Trump has treated India and Modi so far, I'd say there's a good chance they're going to enforce it. I could tell you a story about India where I think what happened is Trump wanted to start this campaign against India for various reasons. Nobody believed he'd put the 25% tariffs, but then he did it. Then they said, oh, he won't enforce it. And now here's the thing, Modi was put on the spot. Modi obviously didn't want to openly order the country not to do this. He wanted to show he's independent. He went to see Xi Jinping and Putin. But Trump talked to him, and I think what Trump did, Modi, I think, was willing to go along because this is a real burden on the country, 25% tariffs, everything they export to the United States. So what Trump did is he put very harsh sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, who send most of the oil to India. So this meant that Modi didn't have to order companies in his country to stop. This would be exogenous. It would come from outside. And I think there's a bit of a deal between them that he's going to go along with this. Now, we'll see. It has to be enforced through secondary sanctions. There'll be people who try to get around it. And it's all about how much the Americans will pursue this and others. The British also have the same sanctions. So it's how much they pursue it. But I can explain this later. I think this is a very serious campaign.
Okay. So India is not that independent from the United States as they thought.
Well, it would be painful to be as independent as they pretend they are.
Yes.
You can put it that way. India is a country that geostrategically isn't really close to anybody. I mean, they like to be on their own, and they have problems with Pakistan. Everybody knows about. They historically have big problems with China, but they sort of play the game with everybody, and so they need to export. And they export a lot to the United States, including computer services, IT services of various kinds. And they send people to work at their companies in the United States. And the United States just put $100,000 on every one of those visas they need to go there. So they were being really constrained. And in a way, these sanctions are a way for Modi to back down without having to say anything, admitting that he's going to allow the companies to back down. They'll get in a lot of trouble if secondary sanctions are enforced and they keep buying Rosneft or Lukoil products.
Yes, and also with Russia pushing for a production pause through OPEC Plus and facing reduced oil revenues, how long can its war economy actually sustain current military spending? Because considering the fact, do you remember that Putin said to its propagandists that imposed sanctions from the United States will not put Russian economy on its knees? So what is your take on that?
Well, it might be that you don't literally, I mean, he's saying the sanctions won't put us on our knees. That might very well be true, but, they're going to, they might be a serious hit that makes them think twice. I think what's going on here, if we step back a little bit, Trump had this policy. He was very committed to this idea that he knows how to make a deal. And he spent quite a bit of time trying to cajole Putin, to entice him with big economic deals and with the idea that, look, there'll be territorial concessions in Ukraine also. I mean, and he really tried, and Putin gave him nothing. Putin and Lavrov gave him nothing. And so the reason he kept that up, I think, is he would like the war to end in such a way that Russia is pulled more towards the West by investments or whatever, and away from China, because he's worried about China. But anyway, that's water under the bridge. It wasn't working. And so he turned to this other policy, which I think was being prepared for a long time in the administration. And that was a policy, I call it coercion first. And so that's what they're doing. On the military front, they've changed their attitude and are giving a lot more military aid and assistance to Ukraine. But on the energy front, the way I understand this, it's a very comprehensive campaign to really destroy the Russian oil sector, to make it, I mean, you can't completely wipe it out, but it's to make it so that Russia isn't really a powerful petrostate anymore. So if this goes on too long, Putin may never recover the oil system. This is a fight on three fronts. Sanctions, but there's also military action in support of the sanctions that's coordinated with Ukraine and that Ukraine can carry out on its own also against ports and against refineries. And there's a third aspect, which is, I believe, that they've been working closely. Trump is very close to Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states that are in OPEC. And since about April, certainly since May, but since April, they've been working together with him to put a lot more oil on the market to create conditions where it's about as good a conditions as you can get. There's a glut of oil. Everybody predicts it through next year. So if a lot of Russian oil is taken off market, there's oil to replace it.
Well, yeah. Speaking about that, so do you think what will be the consequences of this glut of oil in the world?
Well, you notice, if this would have happened almost any other time, that everybody, not everybody, but it was very widely felt, I'm talking for 20 years, whenever there was problems, or 30 years, whenever there was problems with Russia, you can't sanction Gazprom and you can't sanction Rosneft and these companies because they're such a big percentage of the world oil system. If you suddenly took that oil off the market, the prices would spike all over the world. Now, in a major war or confrontation between the superpowers or something, that might have happened, but that would be a very serious situation. But now they're doing it. And I mean, it's not only a matter that, it has to be done in order to ensure that Putin doesn't win in Ukraine. I mean, this has to be done. It's the major economic thing that can be done to Russia. It's a petrostate. But they've created conditions since April. I believe Trump has worked very closely with trying to convince the Saudis, the UAE, and others, look, Russia took your market. They took the market in India. They took the market in China. It was always a competition between Russia and Russia and the Gulf states, Russia and the Saudis mainly, for who China more took, and China would play them off against the other. But when Russia started dumping their oil not dumping, but selling it very cheaply there, when they're under the price cap, those countries lost most of their market in India and also in China, and they want it back. Secretary Doug Burgum of the Interior Secretary in the United States said the other day at a conference, look, what the president is doing is after he got off the phone with Modi, and Modi had told him, okay, we're going to go along with this. We're going to stop taking Russian oil. Burgum said he immediately picked up the phone and called the prince in Saudi Arabia and said, look, there's a market in India. Why don't you go ahead and take it? We're going to issue these sanctions. So this is, I think, a coordinated campaign that you can't only look at the sanctions. It's the sanctions plus military activity. The Ukrainians, we found out now, it's been revealed that all the drone strikes, the drone campaign against the refineries inside the country was with American intelligence support. It's very different than the first campaign like that. It was with American support. So that's part of destroying the petrostate that the Americans want to do. And the third thing is they're trying to work very closely with OPEC, the leader of which is Saudi, to get a lot of oil on the market so they can take the Russian oil off. So it's a three-pronged campaign. These are force multipliers. This is very serious, in my opinion. This is, it's a war. I mean, it's an oil war. I'd call it the oil war of 2025.
Yes, I remember that. And actually, I was listening that conference you mentioned. Is it easy to repair that oil refinery that the Ukrainian army are hitting in Russia? I don't know. Maybe it's kind of a naive question, but I still don't understand how easy it is to repair them. How quick it's possible.
Yeah. It's how should I say this? It's like sort of if you know the game Go, one side makes an advance and the other side, learns a way to sort of mitigate it. The other side learns. So it's that kind of a contest, that kind of a battle. Ukraine has proven that they can produce a large number of drones and maintain this. The question was, when they started doing this a few months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, did Ukraine have enough drones, enough intelligence? Well, it turns out the Americans are helping with that, to maintain this level. They are maintaining it. They may even have been escalating it. So to answer your question more directly, normally, see, a drone is not normally a very big bomb, right? It probably isn't going to sink a big oil ship. It might set it on fire somehow from the top. But so what they can do is there's one very vulnerable part of refineries. It's this stack. It's the where the cracking takes place, and it's very hot, and the oil is essentially being vaporized and separated into lighter and lighter elements, and the lighter and lighter parts, like gasoline or something at the top, and at the bottom, fuel oil and diesel in between, are being taken out, roughly speaking. Something that hot, if you hit that stack, it's metal, you hit it and you break it, the oxygen gets in there, boom, the thing goes up. So that's a very vulnerable part that Ukraine has gotten very good at hitting. On the other hand, the Russians start putting, drone nets around them. They start moving more, more anti-aircraft, and it's a back and forth. And but for Russia, they have to have enough spare parts. They have to bring it from other refineries or have them on hand, and they are repairing them. So it depends on what Ukraine is trying to achieve. If you're trying to completely close down the inside of Russia, it's vast. There's a huge number of these. You're not going to do it. But they're going after certain ones that have to do with certain regions that might not be well supplied in the first place, might supply the war directly, and also might supply the capital, which will bring home to the Russian people what's going on, interfere with war production. So the answer to your question, it's very effective. It's not going to completely shut down Russia, but look, they not only export to make money for the war, they not only export oil, they have always exported lots of surplus, you could say, gasoline and diesel and some other things that are even higher priced. And now the minister in Russia, the energy minister, has had to order that diesel cannot be sold outside the country by the producer. Somebody can buy it and sell it, but otherwise it can't be exported. And the same thing with gasoline is always a problem in Russia. And So that's cutting down a lot of money. Turkey's taking a lot less of that product. They were probably the main taker of it. So that's also hurting. So I see this as part of an overall war on Russian energy to take down the petrostate, to force it to not function as a petrostate that supports wars and aggression.
Yeah, Turkey is in the top three list of the most, consumers of Russian oil products after China and India. But just to clarify, Mr. O'Donnell, so how long will it take to repair that pipeline you said if Ukrainian army will hit it in Russia? So it's going to be week, it's going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be 3 days.
Yeah, that could very well be. I mean, it could be cases, if you can hit one that goes under a lake, that's great. It's harder to repair.
Okay.
But yes, a lot of these can be repaired on land fairly quickly. But drones are cheap. Drones are cheap. You hit the pipeline in 2 or 3 places, you start to overwhelm them. It's sort of this they call it whack-a-mole. It's a contest on both sides to see who can maintain it. And all I could say is Ukraine's doing very well. They're having good results, and they're maintaining it. If they slowed down for a week or so, a whole lot of the refineries would be back online. That's absolutely true. So you have to maintain it. You have to maintain it, and you're distracting and eroding them, causing troubles in factories, causing troubles with transportation. Trains need diesel. They caused a lot of trouble with the harvest. They had problems in that region in the south of Russia to begin with, and then they had problems with diesel for the harvest. And so, this is very effective. You're hurting it, but at the same time, the Americans want to stop the export of all products. And at the same time, I said this a long time ago, if the Americans decide to give up the price cap and instead actually block the oil, in a certain sense, it doesn't matter how perfectly successful the sanctions are, because in tandem, the Ukrainian military can hit those same ports and put the ports out like they just hit the port of Tupea, I believe it's pronounced.
Tuapse.
Yes. And, you put the port out of commission for a day or some days. If it's a Russian ship going to pick up the oil, maybe it'll be ordered. But a foreign ship now is going to have to, somebody who owns something they're renting to the Russians, they're going to think twice. Their ship will be hit maybe. So it's the force multiplier. It's the two things together. It's the sanctions plus the military campaign, which I'm watching very closely to see if it escalates on the ports in the way it did against the refineries inside. So they'll be hit from all sides. And meanwhile, the world isn't suffering high prices, which is quite interesting, because the Saudis and others, the Americans also have put Americans this last month had the highest production of oil and gas in history. The Russians will say, "Oh, they're laying off people." Yeah, they lay off people, and they get more efficient actually with their methods. So they lay off people, but there's a market. The glut of oil, and so this is a very good situation. 3-sided sort of war on Russian oil.
Wow, that's interesting. And
in my view.
And how effective are Russia's sanctions evasion routes through India, China, Malaysia, or even the Greek shipping network? Does the West really have the tools to stop these gray flows?
Yeah. Yes, I think they do. So, for example, the price cap, of course, myself and a lot of people in the oil sector opposed it from the beginning, saying it just can't be successful. There's too many ways around it. The whole idea was to allow Russia to sell all the oil they want to and all the oil products they want to, just limit the price. And with a lot of hubris, it was said, well, Europe and Britain control almost all the insurance. And so if they sell it any higher, we can hit them through the insurance companies. Of course, they have this dark fleet. They bought up hundreds of old ships and so forth. But you're right. The problem is the price of oil started getting low, and it was actually legal for Europeans at certain times to take oil. Now the Greeks the Greeks have a lot of shipping. On one hand, I believe there were companies that were going around and helping with the dark fleet and so forth, and with tricks and so forth. But Other ones would say, look, the price fell below the price cap. It's legal. That's all gone. What I read the day after the sanctions were imposed is that Greek shipping companies, I'm not sure if all of them, announced we're not touching this anymore. Now, we have to make sure that's not temporary. And there, as I said before, that's up to the Trump administration principally, but also it's up to the Brits, who also put similar sanctions, that you just can't touch this oil at all. And if you do, you can't touch dollars. You can't touch a bank that has dollars. You can't make payments and so forth. It's very severe, and that's secondary sanctions. And so let's see if they do it. My theory is this is very deeply supported, not only in the Republican side, but also on the Democratic side in Congress, very deeply. The Senate has been pushing Trump to do this publicly since the June 3rd, when they introduced a bill. They called bone-breaking sanctions on Russia and Russian oil. So it's a matter of enforcement with these force multipliers. So people who say no matter how you enforce it, you can't get it all, that's true. There might be ways around it. But if at the same time the Ukrainian military is hitting the ports and closing them down, or hitting pipelines that supply the ports, the two together might do pretty well. And there might not be so much opposition globally for high prices because of the extra oil on the market. So it has everything needed for success if it's just pushed forward. And so far, I believe they're going to do it.
Yeah, well, Mr. O'Donnell, about the Greece, I don't know, because my colleague and my good friend Caelan Robertson, he's an Irish-British journalist, and he just made his own investigation on the Greek island Lesbos. And it's very interesting what he saw there, how actually bribed lots of ship companies. And that's a huge corruption behind that. And nobody in Athens wants to talk about that. That, under the closed doors, nobody wants to raise that question. Everybody's talking very quietly about that. It's like Greece is not the part of the European Union. That's ironically very sad.
Well, I have to say, unfortunately, there's many countries in Europe that would like to shut all this down. They would like to shut down the oil that Orban is taking, that Slovakia is taking, that Mr. Fico wants, and so forth. Just shut it all down. And they don't necessarily, have the tools. The other thing is they have Hungary, Slovakia, and probably the Greeks voting to make it difficult in the European Union, voting in a way to make it difficult because they need unanimity for almost everything. So the American administration has stepped in and done something that the Europeans aren't capable of doing. They directly sanction all of this. So now you're absolutely right about this corruption. Now it's a matter of how they go after it. They have the tools to go after it if they want to. And let's see, Orban for example, has been saying, oh, no, Trump will give me an exemption, and he's going to the White House to ask for it. Maybe if he promises within so many months to stop it or something, a transition, maybe Trump will. But his people, cabinet level and also diplomats, the representative to NATO, made very clear, we're not into exemptions for this. For this case, we would rather build a pipeline to Hungary, and I think they're serious about this. So they have the tools if they put the effort in, and the Brits have the tools also.
And Mr. Donald, just to sum up the previous issue with the oil glut. So if the glut materializes, does it lower the risk of a price shock for the European Union, or not necessarily?
No, absolutely. It lowers the shock for the whole world. If you go back to the beginning of the year, OPEC and OPEC Plus together were holding about 6 million barrels of production offline a day. Okay, you can quibble about the number, right? But about 6 million barrels in order to try to keep the price up. And then around April, now Trump had made it very clear he wanted them to put oil on the market. He wanted to get the price down. Now he wants to get the price down because he doesn't want inflation in the U.S. That wasn't so effective on inflation, but inflation is doing okay in the U.S. But he really insisted he wanted low prices. And in April, they actually started doing this. And then he went in May to the Gulf states and visited, and it was a veritable sort of love fest, and talking about how closely they'd work together in the oil sector and so forth. So the Saudis have their own reasons for putting this oil back on the market. They didn't want other countries, American shale, Latin American countries who aren't in OPEC Plus, and others to take that market share. So they said they'd put it on the market. But it was just driving prices down, keeping them or driving them down. And now it's clear. I suspected all along that if the Americans want to do this, they should get the Saudis to prepare ahead of time, put extra oil on the market so that when it hits the Russian oil, there won't be a big price spike and a lot of opposition in some countries. That has happened, and now we're hearing, I could show you some quotes if you like, from officials that they suspect that's what happened, and others saying, I saw it happen. I saw the discussion take place. So, I don't know if it answers your question, but the glut has been furthered by OPEC Plus putting that oil almost totally back on the market. It's also furthered by the fact that industrial production, consumption in many countries, Europe, China, hasn't come back like that people thought it would after Corona. So it's kind of a good situation for taking Russia offline. Let me say, Russia exports by sea, we're talking about by sea, we could talk about pipelines separately, but 3.7, 3.8 million barrels a day the last couple months. I just said OPEC Plus had 6 million barrels to put online. Somebody wants to quibble, they only really have 5. Fine, 4.5, fine. That's just OPEC Plus. What can American shale do if they see there's a market? They'll put all these people back to work. And there's other countries too. It's possible Venezuela will come back online. So we don't need that Russian oil. It can be completely shut off.
Yeah. So, okay, Mr. O'Donnell, final. Can ordinary people around the world, by how they buy or consume energy, actually influence this big geopolitical oil war, or is it all decided by governments?
Well, unfortunately, overwhelmingly, it's decided by governments, and the governments mainly are giving orders to companies or facilitating them and so forth. So it takes place there. So if you have a Rosneft station down the street, it's better you don't go to it. Okay, that would be good if people boycotted the products. But mainly, this would take place politically. And I can speak for the United States, and I was just writing yesterday, Europeans should understand this is not just Trump. Of course, it's mainly Trump makes these decisions, but it's not just Trump. 83 senators introduced a bill for 500% tariffs on anybody who takes Russian oil. And it's even more than Trump dreamt of. And they call it bone-breaking sanctions. And they want this to be enacted in law, which would mean that Trump couldn't back down even if he wanted to. So that's overwhelming. As Democrats and Republicans, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted the other day three things unanimously to advance a new Russian sanctions, which included seizing all the Russian assets that are frozen and insisting that Europe do that. Now, my experience is so the elites on this, they're unified. I would say, overwhelmingly, New York, Houston, Washington, that Trump should do this and it's about time. And I would say the attitude amongst the people, you could argue that Trump was naive talking to Putin, or you could say he was brilliant. He showed all the American people that what Putin really is. No matter what I offer him, he won't stop. So I got to do this now. And that's the attitude of the people that more and more Americans I talk to, that's it. This guy's got to be taken down. They use this oil money, that they get so easily. They use this to cause aggression and trouble in many other places of the world, including with China. So that's how you can affect things, is by affecting your government, by talking to your representatives and making pressure, I think.
Well, yeah, it's true. In the United States, I know the procedure, how it's happening there. So at least there is definitely possible.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Donnell, it was such a pleasure to speak to you, to listen to your answers, and thank you so much for dedicating your time to our TV station.
Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!